Welcome to episode 5 of The Magician's Bookshelf, How to Win Friends and Influence People, Part 2, Chapter 3. If you don't do this, you're headed for trouble. If you saw my previous video, you've seen that I teased this video by saying this chapter is actually what this book is really about. And I meant that. This chapter is about remembering people's names. I guess if you don't remember people's names, you are headed for trouble. Like every other chapter before this one, Dale starts with a story, but unusually in this chapter, the story that he's telling isn't even the story that he's telling. Honestly, it's just more padding. I think at one point he actually says, "But that's not the story I'm telling." Okay, he doesn't. But the huge problem is there's absolutely no instruction on how to do this thing he says you absolutely have to do. And that, of course, is remember people's names. I'll try to tell you a short story, and I'll divide this video up into chapters, so hopefully you can skip ahead if you need to, or if that's your thing. I used to do a lot of kids shows, and when I would bring a child up on stage, I would ask them their name, and they would tell me their name, and I'd bring up the second child for the same trick, and I'd already forgotten the first kid's name. And I would turn and be like, "Oh, I'm sorry, what was your name again?" And they would just literally yell it at me, like, "My name's Jimmy!" And I'd be like, I'm sorry. It's because kids only possess a few things, and one of those is their name, and me forgetting their name was a personal affront to them. And also, I'm growing up. I'm supposed to remember stuff. So learning how to remember names is an incredibly important skill. And there are two different methods that I employ. One for short term, i.e. remembering a name just at a show, and the other one for long term, for remembering the name of clients or colleagues that I don't see that often. The short-term method is called either the PEG system or the anchor system, and I'll put a link to that in the description below. And the other system is called the system of the Loci, or a memory palace, and I'll also link to that too. Now, the reason I don't use a memory palace for the short-term stuff is I either have to then erase the memory palace to reuse it or keep building new ones. Of course, none of that makes sense unless you know what that method is. If you want to check out books on memory work and some really cool stuff with memory, I highly recommend the book Moonwalking with Einstein and the memory book by Lorayne. And I'll throw links to both of those in the description below too. Oddly, this chapter, like its previous, is only 8 pages long, but seems to say so much more than the previous chapter. But that just might be confirmation bias because I think this stuff is important. The chapter ends with what we've come to expect, a simple graphic with a box with text. And this one reads, "Remember that a person's name is to that person the sweetest and most important sound in any language." Up next, chapter 4, or maybe it's the 4th part of chapter 6 ways to get to people to like you. Any way you count them, it's called An Easy Way to Be a Good Conversationalist. It's actually some really good advice. Check it out. And if you like this stuff, do the things.